Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on our 29th Pimento call of the year. I'd just like to introduce myself very quickly. I'm David Morley. I'm the Partner Director at Pimento. I look after London, the home counties and Norfolk. And as you can see, I'm not Stephen Knight. I'm standing in for Stephen this week, who Stephen's away. Really looking forward to starting this session, but I'd just like to throw in a quick news flash. I had an email this morning from Teresa saying that officially available today on Apple and Spotify is the brand new Marketing Spice podcast by Pimento. It's hosted by Paddy and expertly produced by Claire. The series will be looking at the latest marketing trends, insights, and for the first episode, it'll be about digital transformation and how brands have to change, over the next, will have to change over the next year. So I just thought I'd throw that one out as a bit of a news flash. In terms of etiquette for the call, for those who haven't been on previous Pimento calls, there is a chat box, so any questions you have, please put those into the chat box and we'll cover them off as the session runs through. We want to try and make the sessions interactive as possible, and just for etiquette's sake, and we are recording today's call, and this will be made available to the entire network later in the week. So let me start. This week we'll be discussing diversity and inclusion, the why, the what, and how for agencies. With a 42% decline in the number of people in the industry in the last 5 years, and given that there isn't an agency that is not looking for talent just now, not only is D&I a moral issue, it's a vital business issue we need to grasp. Today, I'm joined by HR experts Heidi, Wadsworth, and Nicola Gaiter from Reality HR, who will guide you through the issues, the opportunities in this interactive workshop, building on the excellent session delivered a few weeks ago by Srabani Sen OBE and founder and CEO of Full Colour, where we learned why diversity inclusion was such a hot should be top of our agendas. So today we need to find out the business benefits, the potential pitfalls of not being diverse and inclusive, and reflect on what you want to achieve and why, and discover how you will now be able to succeed by following some of the advice given. So let me introduce you firstly to Heidi. She's the master trainer at Pimento member Reality HR, and she describes herself as a wonderfully patient, but with a direct, down-to-earth approach that gets to the heart of the subject in hand. With a background in leisure, retail, and manufacturing industries, she prides herself in bringing legislation and processes to life in engaging and relevant sessions. She's passionate about ensuring a positive return on investment in training and has a deep understanding of the commercial aspects of HR. When she's not delivering one of her memorable sessions, she's working on bespoke training programs, always ensuring that they are relevant to organizational objectives of a client. Her core expertise is learning and development, employment legislation, and of course, equality and diversity. The second lady on the call today is Nicola Gaiter. She loves the difference between her expertise makes to employees and the bottom line of her clients that she works with. She is a brilliant all-rounder with employment relations and performance improvement skills honed in the high-pressure world of the airline industry. Nicola has built a constructive and productive relationship between employees and managers, and enjoys seeing the rewards they bring to business. She has a strong ability to interpret complex employment law into the practical and offers advice from her extensive experience in the employment implementation, in particular with mergers and acquisitions, including the challenges of TUPE regulations. Her core expertise is employment law, employment relations, and making organizations work. And just for clarification, TUPE is transfer of undertaking protection of employment. I just thought I'd look that one up. So I'd now like to hand over to Heidi and Nicola, and they'll start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thanks, David. Oh, it's a bit uncomfortable hearing that all about yourself in front of you, isn't it, Nicola? Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. As David says, we're going to run through a fairly short presentation, building on the session a few weeks ago that some of you may have heard from Srabani. We're going to present some sort of structured ideas about how you can approach equality, diversity and inclusion as a project, as a company-wide initiative. And then actually what we're going to do is switch off the slides and have a much more relaxed conversation. Hopefully you guys will get opportunity to join in, share your questions and thoughts with us. And we'll share some suggestions around how you can do things straight away. What can you do right now to make diversity and inclusion come to life within your organisations, within your agencies? So I will start with a PowerPoint deck, as we tend to do, don't we? Start with a deck, and then, as I say, we'll go casual later on and enjoy a conversation. So we're going to cover off a few factual parts, a few strategic procedural steps. I thought we would just start by saying that you'll notice straight away that Nicola and I are not particularly diverse in our appearance, and we'll put that out there straight away. Reality HR is a very homogenous group of HR professionals, and we're aware of that fact, and we are actively looking to develop our own diversity and inclusivity, and which hopefully gives us a good insight to how you guys might be feeling about some of this, that we're not particularly diverse yet. We're a team of 14. We all work in very similar ways. We all live in similar areas. We come from similar backgrounds. We're all similar ages. But that doesn't mean that we can't start the journey that hopefully you're going to start with us. We can take you on the journey about looking at our current practices and how we can diversify and make sure that we are inclusive for all those for any new starters and for everyone who's in the organisation already. So I won't say any more about Nicola or I, because David's given us a great intro. But as we go through the session, please feel free to ask any questions of us about how our journey is looking and where we see Reality HR moving in the future. I thought I'd remind us of the definitions and a recap for those that were on the call in September, and just in case anybody missed Srabani's session back in September, these are the definitions around diversity and inclusion and equality. Sometimes you'll hear that as EDI, sometimes people refer to it as D&I. So I thought it would be useful just to make sure we're all on the same page with these definitions. So diversity is about having different kinds of people within your organisation, a diverse workforce, but also about the organisation being that different. So we don't just do it, it's not tokenism. We are accepting and welcoming people from all diverse backgrounds. And let's throw that out there now. What does that mean? It means different races, different ethnicities, different nationalities. It means different genders. It means people with different sexualities. It means people from deprived backgrounds, as well as people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Across the board, we can see so many different areas. When we're talking about diversity, we're not just talking about one of these categories. We're talking about how we can relate and cross the board of so many different categories of people, that we bring the absolute breadth, the widest possible set of experiences to our organisation. And we'll come on to why that's important in a moment. So once we've got a wonderfully diverse workforce, inclusion is about making the most of those differences. It's about, Srabani told us, it's about more than being friendly. It's about actually making sure that everybody in the organisation has an equal valued voice. Everybody's included in decision making, problem solving. Everybody has the equal opportunity to develop within the organisation. And I think this is where it's quite, on one of our original adverts to say, come and join the session today, we said you've got to be open to looking at what your current practices are. And this is a key point for me. You may well have a diverse organisation across the board. But when you look at the top, is it still as diverse? And that, I think, is quite an important point, isn't it, Nicola, that we see quite often. People have done a very good job of getting a diverse workforce in place, but who they're promoting, who gets the senior positions, who gets those positions of power, which was something Srabani talks about a lot, is maybe not quite as diverse. And that is a key point as we go through the session today that we'll come back to. So equality is about evening out power, making sure that everybody has the opportunity to have the voice, the say, the input into the organisation. Hopefully that's just a quick refresher, and I apologise for those of you that you have watched this recently or heard the session recently. I apologise for repeating, but it's important, I think, that we're all talking in the same language, and this is another interesting point that Srabani said about, she gave us a very strong reasoning why we should do EDI, and I'm not going to recap all those figures. I'm not going to tell you all of those percentages about companies who have diversity, say they've improved their bottom line, etc., because we know this is a fact. We know that the business case is strong for doing EDI, and we also know it's the right thing to do. So Stephen asked us at Reality HR a couple of months ago to think about how we could support businesses like yourselves in a project, in an initiative to broaden your diversity and strengthen your inclusivity. And what we've come up with is a 7-step toolkit that we would work with you as an individual agency owner or an individual business leader to tailor it to your organisation. It's simple to use guidance, step-by-step guidance to follow, to look at where you are now, where you want to be in the future, and give you really simple steps to get there. So a structured outline that would be tailored to your business. So I'm going to spend just a couple of moments talking through those 7 steps. And then, as I say, we'll throw the session open and get rid of the PowerPoint and make it much more relaxed. But we'd be happy to take any questions on this as we go and come back to them at the end. End of the session. So let's have a look. Step 1, the first session, and Srabani touched on this for us in her talk. We need to gather the right people. You need somebody at board level, somebody at the top, an executive sponsor to lead this, but you need to make sure that you are looking for volunteers and experts from across your business to be involved in any diversity and inclusion project. You cannot impose this just from the top without people's buy-in, without understanding how people who work in the organisation feel, particularly those from diverse backgrounds. We can't assume we know how it feels to work somewhere. We have to ask the right people to be involved. So we have to get champions and role models within the business. We have to get a team of people that will work together on the project, will work together on this initiative, and will make change. Having a team of people, having people in positions of strength, positions of talking out loud, shining a light on some of the issues, will then get people interested. And this will be the starting point for your EDI project or a D&I project. So getting a team together. And then planning. What do you want to achieve from this? Using the input from the team, and maybe they're representing other aspects of other people in the workforce. What is it you'd like to achieve? Why are you doing a D&I project in your organisation? How will you measure success? And I think this is really critical, to make sure you've got some clear goals at the start that have measures around them. What's that saying? What we measure, we do, or what gets measured gets done. What we measure gets done. So we need to make sure we can quantify what is it we're looking to achieve with a D&I project. We might be putting quite a lot of resource into this. So why? What's the business outcome? What's the moral and ethical outcome? Will it impact just our internal staff, how they feel? Will it go wider than that? Will it be about customer impact? Will it enhance our external reputation, maybe as an employer brand? Or actually, will it enhance our reputation with customers? So we need to know what it is we're looking to achieve from a project. Why are we going to invest time and money and energy into a project? What do we want to do And this is where at Reality HR, we would work with you very closely to make sure these goals of your program are really clearly defined for your business, because there's no one size fits all at this stage. Every industry, every business is in a different position and will be looking for different outcomes. And so making sure these are tailored to your business are really key. So there are some standard themes across a D&I project, but actually making sure it's tailored to your business is the really important point here. So I would say you can't just go and pick a few of these. You need to do some real good research with all those people you've got on board in your team and understand what it is you're looking to solve. Now, Nicola and I are HR people. It's all about the legal bits for us. There's lots of bits about procedure. There's lots of bits about data protection that you've got to have in place before you can go and do anything. You've got to understand the procedural and legal implications of gathering some sort of data and what you're going to do with that data, excuse me, and how you're going to process people's personal data. So you've got to have a plan around what documentation, what procedures will you need to help you achieve those goals that you've just set. And a really big implication around data protection, so GDPR. When we're gathering and storing and processing people's personal data, we've got to have a very good mind to the law, but we've also got to be proving to our staff that they can trust us with that data. So while we legally have to get this right, we also, it's so important that people have to believe and trust in us that we're going to do the right thing with their data. And this comes down to communication. So making sure we've got clear forms, clear survey questions, clear monitoring forms. And then we're also very clear with that what we're going to do with it, how we're going to store it, who's going to have access to the data. Is it going to be anonymized? There's pros and cons for anonymizing data we collect. We'll come on to that, I think, in our session towards the end. But showing that you've given due consideration to all these factors will build people's confidence in you, in the project you're leading. So we can talk you through those GDPR implications, the data protection implications, but really it's about how you're going to communicate this to people. How are you going to tell them what you want to collect and why, and what you want to do with that information? So making sure you've got role models and people from all aspects of the organisation brought in will again help build that trust in your process. Once you know what you want to achieve from this project, you'll have a view about what you need to gather, what information you need to know. You need to have a baseline to know where we are right now. What does this snapshot of the organisation look like at this moment in time? So you can measure the gap between where you'd like to be and where you are. And then our next step will be looking in to put in some action plans to bridge the gap. But some of the things you might want to measure. Employee demographics. You'll want to understand how many people in your organisation are members of LGBTQ plus community, how many people are living with a disability, maybe how many people have religious backgrounds, people with caring responsibilities, veterans, as well as the obvious age, gender, gender we identify with, sexuality maybe. So we've got lots of things we can gather data around. But that's not the whole picture. We also need to understand what happens once people are in the organisation. What's their employee life cycle look like, and are there any discrepancies between groups? So are there discrepancies in performance or performance ratings? Are there discrepancies in pay and reward? And I'm sure you'll have all heard of the gender pay reporting regulations, which don't apply to most of you because they've got, is it 250? You have to report the gender pay gap, any gender pay gap within your organisation when you have over 250 employees. But that's not to say it's not a useful exercise for all organisations to look at. Is there a gap between what the men and the women in your organisation earn? And then, of course, not just on gender, but all the other factors we just talked about, you might want to look at, is there a pay gap in any of these other areas of diversity? Are there any discrepancies in promotion and progression? And that's what I touched on right at the beginning of the session, where I said you might have a very diverse workforce at the base of the organisation, but does that diversity continue to be reflected as you go up the levels of seniority? So are we promoting people from that diverse groups? You might get some feedback from customers, and you might then also be doing getting some feedback from employees about how it feels to work in the organisation. So we can look at demographics as and diversity data, but actually what's arguably more important, or as important, is an inclusivity survey to say, how do people feel about working in the organisation? And this is an interesting way of finding that out. You might want to do an inclusivity survey to get to establish a baseline about how people feel about working here. And there's some example questions on the screen that might be useful for you to go out and understand from your staff. So, do people feel like they belong? Can they voice a contrary opinion without fear of negative consequences? Are their perspectives included in decision making? Do they have the opportunity to speak up? Does the company believe across the board that people can improve their talents and abilities? And do people feel that they administrative tasks that don't have a specific owner are fairly divided? And that's an interesting one that can lead on to all sorts of conversations. And it's very vague on purpose, because this is about administrative tasks, potentially things like taking notes in meetings or who does the tea round. So these can be very minor things to us from our outsider's view, but actually for someone who's living with it and is always expected to pick up the slack, that can feel like quite an important part of their working life, and can make them feel less valued, because actually they're given these basic admin tasks or housekeeping tasks more than they see other people being given them. So it's an important point to pick up on. So an inclusivity survey can really add quite a lot of depth to your diversity data gathering.
I think that brings a real reality to what's happening within the organisation as well, because as per your previous slide, you could do a data gathering exercise and actually show that your workforce is quite diverse across a number of lenses. But if you go out and ask your people about how inclusive it feels, and can they be themselves in the workplace, or do they feel they have to hide certain attributes of themselves in order to get on, in order to be considered for training and progression and promotion and things like that, then you may have a very diverse workforce, but it's not an inclusive workplace, because people are having to hide aspects that their diversity brings. So it's important to touch on all sides of this, this whole area.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks, Nicola. So once you understand your baseline about both diversity and inclusivity, you can set some action plans. And I'm not really going to touch too much on action plans now, because they're going to be very different for each organisation. It will depend on your current baseline and your goals. Which of those areas are you going to work on first? Which do you see are the most pressing? What issues were thrown to light in the surveys? What do people have the appetite to change? What is it possible to change? We can't automatically overnight change the makeup of our organisation. We can't click our fingers and be more diverse. So what we can do is start thinking about the longer term planning. So what plans, actions, steps are we going to put in? You need to have measures, goals, targets, and someone accountable for any actions that's going to happen here. So your senior, your executive leader, that's the champion for your project, needs to be accountable and need to report back both to the board, but also to the wider business about what steps are taken, what progress is being made. So somebody has to be accountable, because if there's no one with accountability, then it will slip off everyone's radars, because actually we're all busy. Everyone will be getting on with their day job. So it will be important to have accountable goals, accountable targets, and KPIs and measures. What are we doing and what progress we're making? I thought at this point we might just mention that our action plans should be around positive action, not positive discrimination. I suppose to a certain extent it's semantics, because we might just assume that they're the same thing. But from a HR perspective, there's a real legal difference between positive action and positive discrimination. And I thought it just worth clarifying that for you at the moment. So under the Equality Act 2010, discrimination is illegal, bluntly, apart from in some very small situations where we might use positive discrimination around those with a disability, but they're very, very small, very rare occasions where we would actually be looking to use positive discrimination. What we really want to be looking at in our action planning here is positive action. And positive action is lawful if it's taken to enable or encourage people who share a protected characteristic to overcome a disadvantage connected with that characteristic. So positive action is to enhance the enhance opportunity for people from protected characteristics, groups with protected characteristics. It's to enable or encourage people who share that protected characteristic to participate in an activity that they are normally excluded from. So we might use positive action in recruitment. There's a lot of suggestions that we can come up with. A positive action to use in recruitment would be things like targeted adverts in publications that are likely to be accessed by our underrepresented group. So for example, if you're an engineering company and you're looking to increase your female representation, you might then be thinking, well, where are female engineers going to be looking? Where can we advertise that we will access those few female engineers that are out there? How will we find them? How will we get to them? How will we tell them, invite them to come and work for us? So we look at our target advertising. We don't just go on the main job boards. We actually think, where will the people I'm looking to increase representation from be reading? Where will they be looking? We could advertise in certain places. We could potentially in recruitment look and ask our recruitment agencies to provide gender diverse candidate shortlists. I think someone's not on mute there, Teresa. I'm not sure if you can see who that might be. We might provide, I don't know, for example, women only recruitment days, or once we've got some women working for our organisation. Sorry, I'm thinking of a specific example of an engineering company that Nicola and I have both worked with that are very keen to increase their female representation, but this is only one aspect, one lens, of course. But they might be setting up women's networking programs for sharing career advice once they're in the company. So in recruitment, it's quite simple to think of some positive action that we can take to encourage people from our underrepresented groups to apply for our roles. Nicola, you mentioned to me something about career progression planning specifically for underrepresented groups, didn't you? So,
yeah, and I think that's the key difference between what you're doing and how you're doing it. How are you achieving your aims? And whereas in recruitment or career progression, positive discrimination would be specifically choosing a particular candidate because of a protected characteristic. Now that's really unlikely to be lawful in most situations. However, the positive action is to understand why you might not beforehand have had people from a particular diverse group coming through your recruitment or your career progression channels, and taking out some of those barriers and making sure that they do have the opportunity. So as Heidi said, making sure that people in particular groups really do have the opportunity to think about career progression and get the training that they need to make that progression, and just understanding where the barriers might be, whether they're very unlikely to be intentional barriers, but the understanding that they do exist, and then taking specific actions to remove the barriers, so that everybody from diverse perspectives are encouraged to come through, but without selecting them because of that protected characteristic, which would be more unlawful part.
Thank you. We'd be very happy to take any questions on that, because it's while it is about semantics, it's also a really important point. So when we finish off, we've just got a couple more steps to go through. If anyone's got any questions about how that could look in real life, we'd be really happy to answer those questions, or try and answer those questions. That's a really valid point, actually. I'll just chuck that out there. This is tough. This is really hard stuff, and none of this is simple. There aren't any easy answers to any of these questions. So I'm saying that we'll try and answer the questions, because there isn't one size fits all. There isn't a single silver bullet that can fix EDI for all of us. If there were, we'd have all done it by now. So the phrase I think Srabani used was we've all got to put the work in. We've all got to do the work here. And so Nicola and I are on journeys of learning journeys as much as you guys are to see how we can help different organisations to do this. So yeah, it's not easy, but we're hopefully, as long as we're all with an open mind to learn, then we can move all of our organisations forward. So we've got action plans, and then we need to make sure we are supporting the people that are in the organisation to be able to achieve those action plans, to be able to achieve the goals. And we might need some training for our managers, but also for our staff, and offering support. So we could be offering training around, so some compliance training. So you might just choose to do some equality and diversity training, e-learning for everybody in the organisation. That ticks a box and says we've done something, but that in itself is probably not going to be enough. It needs to be part of a wider programme that helps people to embrace differences, and training around overcoming unconscious bias. That's a controversial phrase at the moment, unconscious bias training, about whether it's useful or not. But again, as part of a wider package of measures and goals and actions, I think there's definitely value to be had. Training for your managers in managing diverse populations and in embedding inclusive behaviours. So what does inclusive behaviour look like? So sharing back the survey results about how people feel at the moment, and then making sure we're putting in the opportunity and the support for managers to make the environment more welcoming and more inclusive. So there is lots of training opportunity that's needed to support all these wider initiatives. And then we've got to measure progress. We've got to understand where we were, where are we now, what's our next set of goals. It's an ongoing process. We're not going to fix this in a 3-month project. This has to be an ongoing long-term plan for your organisation. You will choose, you will prioritise which of the aspects you're going to work on first, but really good if you can see some progress in one area. That gives real momentum to the programme, and people see that they can trust that the process, that the initiative works. They can see improvement in one area. We can then move to other areas and broaden our scope. So we've got to keep measuring progress to know where we're making progress and where we're not, because actually what we try might not work immediately. And at that point, we have to have resilience around this and say, well, okay, that didn't work, why not? And what else can we try? Not, oh, that didn't work, so we'll chuck the whole idea out the window. So it's about keeping that on people's agendas, keeping the focus on all of the goals that we're working towards, learning from what does work, learning from what doesn't work, and actually learning from other organisations, because there's real value in sharing what people are doing. And that's where I think Nicola and I have hopefully be able to bring some ideas to you today, that we work with a number of organisations who are looking at different aspects of EDI, and we can bring ideas, live ideas that we know have worked, and ideas that people have tried that haven't worked. And that's where the value can come from, sharing these ideas. And that's why I think it's fantastic that Stephen's got a couple of sessions around EDI with all of you, a broad spectrum of agency owners and business owners. Then we can be sharing these ideas. None of us can do this in isolation. So in summary, a toolkit with us would look at annual audits, quarterly pulses and other surveys, action plans shared with the team, and consultancy support to help you achieve it. So a tailored plan for your business to meet your aims and objectives that will really actually help add value to the bottom line in your organisation. But you might not be in a position to start that project right now. But you can make a big difference with just some small steps. So we thought that there's a value in us now throwing some ideas out, things that we know people are doing just as one-offs, or as 1 or 2 or 3 offs, but not necessarily as part of a structured programme. So think about the right time for a broad scale initiative, but actually think also about what you can do right now. Things that don't necessarily cost a lot in time or money, but some simple changes that can make a real big deep impact on the inclusivity, how people feel about working in your organisation. So I'm going to stop sharing the slides. Let's get everybody back on the screen. It's nice to see everyone's faces properly. We'll keep an eye on the chat for any questions, but you're also very welcome if anyone wants to unmute and shout a question, put your hand up, and then we can sort out who's got questions for us. But I thought, Nicola, do you want to start us off with some of your sort of some small, simple ideas that people can do right now at the end of the session?
Yeah, I think first it's really important to recognise the diversity of diversity, and that there are many lenses, many different diverse groups that need consideration and recognition. And quite often with media, then certain diverse groups have a very high profile at different times. And so when we talk to some of our client organisations about diversity and inclusion, they might think, well, it's a focus on women in the workplace or race, and trying to address specific issues with those particular groups. But we mustn't lose sight of diversity as a broader theme. And I like to think about it as bringing in diversity of thinking and different people's perspectives, which are generated from all different backgrounds and different experiences that people have lived. And you know, Heidi, you talked about a lot of different types of diverse groups early on, and then Russell added some more, which is great. And I think we just need to recognise that there are lots of different aspects that we need to be thinking about. Now, naturally, some lenses will need a particular focus because they may have particular specific and unique barriers that need addressing in a particular way. But there's also some measures, some things that can be done that address diversity and inclusion as a broader cultural theme. So I think it's important just to recognise all of that, and that some individuals may belong to different diverse groups at the same time. And that again brings unique issues and barriers and solutions that need to be found. So I think if we keep in mind it's about how we bring that diversity of thinking and perspective, whatever the background, then that's the goal. One of the quick wins that's linked to something that Heidi talked about earlier is establishing employee networks and getting that employee voice and involvement and feedback. So whilst we would always recommend employee feedback and developing employee groups as part of a broader D&I strategy and project, if that's what we want to call it, I think it doesn't have to be too formal. And if you're not in that position, you can still do it now in a more informal way. We have this great technology now. Certainly we've got used to things like Microsoft Teams over the last couple of years, where it's really easy to set up chat groups. So I know a number of my clients will have an employee group for women, and they can come and talk about, as a group, specific issues within the workplace that they might be facing, or just build relationships, seek support. And I think whilst we can build on that, and when you get into the more strategic goals of a D&I project or initiative, then you can go further with these groups and actually use them to generate ideas and own actions and really push through that strategy with the commitment from the top. I think if you're not in that position yet, you can still do the same thing and set up the groups to offer support to people within your organisation. But obviously manage the expectations of that. What you don't want to do is say, right, we're going to set up these groups, or invite you to set up groups, and it's going to lead to all of this change immediately. You need to manage expectations as to what those groups are for. But then they're there when it's the right time. You can start to build on the impact that they have and the involvement they have in the more strategic aims later on. So I know a number of organisations are doing this now, and I think it's a good way just to start to get people thinking and getting that feedback. Employees are often the best place for suggestions in any aspect of work, not just D&I. They experience things in certain ways. They'll hear about things from friends and family and other workplaces. And I think if they have that safe space in which to make suggestions and be heard, then it adds value to the sorts of things that you'll be thinking about as wider D&I initiatives.
Nicola, I just build on that. Stephen's just popped a note in the chat that hopefully everyone's seen, that Las Pimentas is making headway as a women's group across the industry. So members are, all female members are welcome to join. And that's a great example where you might be in a small organisation of only 10 people yourself, and it feels like, how do we do this in such a small environment, but actually use those broader networking groups that exist in the industry. So yeah, and if other members have got other diverse backgrounds that they'd like to set up groups for, that's yeah, fantastic suggestion from Stephen there, that people could do that, set up those other groups. I'm just picking up on some of the points in the chat. So Stephen, we're using the word project when we're talking about D&I here, because what Nicola and I are suggesting with the toolkit is a structured strategic plan for approaching it. And a project isn't maybe the right word, but it was the easiest way to describe it in my mind, at least, that you're right, it's not a project, it's an ongoing, it is a necessity, and it's an ongoing cultural feel within an organisation. But if you don't set out a project timeline, timescales and measures, then it will just drop off people's agenda. So I'm using the word project just to describe the structure of the approach, not the fact that this is a project that we're just adding on as a sideline to our business. And we had a question about, how do we convince leaders? How can we encourage leaders?
Heidi, I was just going to say, it's really important again to manage expectations, in that this is an ongoing aspect of work, and it isn't a defined project within a defined timeline. And I think where we're getting commitment from the leadership, they need to understand that as well. So it's not something that you're going to do and then it's done. It has to be on the agenda, the strategic agenda, you know, month in, month out, year in, year out, because it's so important that, and it changes all of the time. There's always going to be different aspects to how our workforces are made up, and the things we need to be considering to attract and retain and drive the performance of different individuals, regardless of their background. And that's a continuous strategy for an organisation. So I think there has to be that understanding and commitment that this isn't a one-time thing, it's forever, and it needs everybody to buy into that.
We had a question from Lisa that says, how can we encourage leaders to implement measures that don't have an immediate commercial benefit?
Well,
this is, yeah, this
for
is
me again, to repeat what I just said, I think that's a challenge of people plans anyway. For some organisations, we have that constant criticism that HR isn't commercial enough and we're all warm and fluffy and it's not hitting the bottom line. I think the same sort of applies to these people plans, in that it comes back to, how do we attract and retain the most talented workforce in our industry, drive their performance, involve them in driving the performance of our organisation. Now that comes with attracting the best people, regardless of their background or whatever minority group they may fall in. And it's about, how can we get the best people? And if we have to focus on D&I initiatives to be able to get the best people, then absolutely that's what we should do. And that feeds through to the bottom line. And that will be a consideration of many, many organisations, and perhaps a driver for these sorts of plans. But equally, I've worked with client organisations recently, and when I've said to them, what are you trying to achieve? Because that will have to lead your plan. They've said, actually, for us, it's about leading change in our industry. It's about showing change in society, which is admirable, but I understand for many, many organisations, it has to be about the commerciality of it as well. So, yeah.
A couple of comments have just popped up to add to that answer, Nicola, about customers. Customers are expecting diverse workforces. Customers are looking for organisations that have diversity and inclusion strategies that represent them.
Yes.
So how can we expect to sell to customers when we have no understanding of the customer's lived experience?
Yes.
and actually broadening our workforce into all types of thinking and backgrounds, etc., all of those lenses of diversity, means that we can understand the challenges our customers face, and we can then better build relationships with them. So it's about, that's about bottom line, that's about attracting more customers as well as internally more staff. So there are more and more challenges from customers to say, what are you doing around D&I, and how do you represent me? How do I know that you are in touch with me and my needs? So customers are really key in this question as much as team are. So I'm just scrolling through the chat to see if there's anything else cropped up. Nicola, have you got any other little...
Just to build on that, really, if one of the drivers is that your customer base is wanting to see D&I within your organisation, then it's really important to think about how you're going to go about that. And some organisations might be tempted, right, let's pull together an equality policy or a diversity and inclusion policy. We've got a written document, we can send it out to our customers and we tick the box. And I think, you know, it's really important to recognise that that doesn't achieve what your customers really want to see. And many organisations will have these policies or documents already in place, but it's really important to review them regularly to ensure that it truly reflects what your organisation is doing, and to use it to drive out actions if change is needed or improvement is needed. Because if it isn't what your customers or your staff see in practice, they won't believe that you're truly committed to it. So make sure that you are only committing either with what you say or what you put in policies and documents to what you're able to do at that moment in time, because you will just damage trust of these stakeholders so much if they're not really seeing what you're saying you're doing.
On that point, Nicola, I think we've talked recently about many organisations put rainbow flags out during Pride Week or Pride Month, don't they? We see many organisations advertising their support for Pride, but actually those organisations don't always live those values, because when you talk to individuals who work for those companies, they don't support the diversity within the organisation, so they're not inclusive. So they're saying all the right things, but they're actually not living that value. And that's really important, because that really does damage trust as well. I think that's a real key driver there, that whatever you are saying you do and whatever you're saying you support has to actually feel that way. And that's why an inclusivity survey is at least as important as the diversity, as the demographic data that you're collecting, to understand how it really feels within the organisation. Now, we've had a couple of questions, I'm conscious of the time, a couple of questions around being a small agency, and how do you, as a small group of people, how do you be diverse enough? Do you have to try and tick off every single diversity base? Do you have to try and cover every lens in 10 people? And what do you think there, Nicola?
It almost comes back to what you said about us as a small organisation, and we recognise that if you were to look at our website, you might think that our organisation is not very diverse. Now we can say that's from no want of trying, and actually the way our organisation was set up originally was to tackle an issue of women in the workplace. So we sort of come through the other side. We were doing something well, but it's ended up with an unintentional consequence. I think if you focus on some of the things that we've talked about, such as why you're doing it, then that will guide you in, no, it's not a tick box about getting every type of person, from every type of background into your organisation. It's about what works well for your customers, what type of people will bring the right perspective and the right qualities and talent to your organisation, and making sure that there's nothing that you have unintentional within your organisation that is putting off those talented people because of a particular diverse group that they may belong to. And I think it is about being really honest and looking for things that you can't see on the surface, but again, getting that feedback from people so that you can spot things. But it's about focusing on the talent that you need and where that's going to come from, rather than trying to tick every box, for want of a word.
Yeah. Julia's made raised another valid question that says, as a small agency, when they need to recruit, senior leaders have the attitude of employing the first person who fits the role. And sometimes that means appointing someone without advertising, or advertising with a deadline, but still assessing some of the CVs before the deadline's passed and picking someone early on. So therefore, not all candidates have the same opportunity to get their CV seen. Any advice on addressing this?
I think there's a couple of things. I think obviously it's not always ideal, because you may be excluding a better person, but we completely understand that there are time pressures sometimes. So if you can open up an opportunity as much as you can to get the widest pool of talented candidates, so that you have a better choice to make, a better pool to choose the best person from, then that's always the preference. But just to pick up on the point about we've got someone that fits, Heidi and I have had some interesting discussions lately about what fit means. And often in recruitment, we will talk about team fit. But I know, Heidi, you've been talking about actually, rather than team or cultural fit, think about cultural add. So whereas we've always thought, right, we need to bring in people that fit our existing team, what does that actually mean? And often it may be the case that we're bringing in people that think like us, that look like us, that have the same career backgrounds and things like that, because we think they will fit our team and work well. Now, what's important is that somebody can come into your existing team and build really good, productive, constructive working relationships, but they may come from a different background. And to be able to bring a diversity of thought, a different perspective that actually adds value to your existing team. So it's about that add rather than just focusing on the fit. And if you're thinking you've got someone that fits, just challenge yourself before you make the final decision. Just challenge yourself. Is that really the right person, or is there somebody else that could add a bit more to our team if we took a little bit more time?
Yeah, I think so. I think we quite often hire like ourselves, and that's across the board. You will all probably feel that when you look to your practices, you will hire like yourselves, whether that be like the way you look, or like the universities you came through, or the work experience you've had. And actually, we could be missing out there. So recruitment's a really good time to be thinking about this. So how do you attract a broad range of people to the organisation in the first place? How do you get them to apply? So absolutely, I would say, Julia, advertising every job is really important, not just assuming you're going to have people internally to promote. But also, if you do have someone in mind for an internal role, actually, do you advertise internally and let everybody else have the opportunity to apply? I think advertising internally to allow internal promotion is really important, not just identifying who you think is going to take that role next. So yes, it's important to have a succession plan and to know who you have in mind as your future leaders, but actually allowing people the opportunity to put themselves forward if you haven't identified them is crucial. But then, oh, go on, David, you're gonna...
I was going to say, we've got Russell on the call, who has just been, is now a DNI approved recruiter. He's just been through a process. I just wondered whether it was worth Russell unmuting and adding his thoughts. I mean, that's his business. This is what he does. Hi, Russell. Can't see you on the screen. Would you like to unmute and make some comments?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hi, Heidi. Hi, Nicola. Yeah. So I've just completed a 5-week DNI course on recruitment, obviously focused in terms of recruitment. And you know, the first thing I'd say is that, you know, what you've covered, Heidi and Nicola, is pretty comprehensive. But you can't just do it in an hour. You can't cover the whole gamut of DNI in an hour. So I think, you know, I think there are 2 points that I think there are 2 key points I would make in terms of recruitment. One is, and you covered it briefly, unconscious bias. It is something that you have to train yourself out of, basically. We all have unconscious bias, whatever your background, creed, race, religion, sexual orientation, you've got it. And you have to kind of take that out of any kind of decisioning and any kind of investigations that you make, etc. And then I think the second key point is, and you see it all the time, is when you're advertising for roles, there is unconscious bias, which will, some people will look at an ad and say, well, that's not me. I'm not dynamic. I'm not a go-getter. I'm not this, I'm not that. And they will preclude themselves from that, from the process, particularly people who may be not neurodiverse, particularly people from different cultures or backgrounds. And equally, when you're writing your job descriptions as well, you have to think about D&I from in that perspective as well. You have to really almost forensically look at it and say, is there anything there that will make people feel uncomfortable about the role that I'm actually I'm actually doing. And it's really challenging. I was, very brief example, my son is neurodiverse. He was offered a job yesterday, hooray, for a very well-known big retailer. And I read through his job description of what he's actually doing. And, there are certain aspects that, he was uncomfortable with, but he got offered the job anyway. And I said, well, and this is a big company that I'm sure has lots of is very into D&I. And it's still there, so it's very, very challenging. And the final point I'd like to make, because obviously I'm aware of time, is that you mentioned right at the beginning, it has to be led from the front. The person that has to lead your D&I initiative in terms of a policy is your CEO, basically. And obviously bring other people in, your HR director, and and you're right, a representative from a particular group as well. But it has to be led from that person, and it has to have purpose at the end of the day, because if it doesn't, then it's just not going to happen. Companies are just going to make lip service from it. And I can see, because obviously I'm aware that everyone on the call is either an agency or a supplier to larger companies potentially, that just as the companies when they're working with suppliers say, you have to sign this thing for the Slavery Act, etc. It's going to happen with D&I in the not too distant future as well. So that's my input. Thanks,
Russell. We appreciate it. I've just noticed that Lisa's raised a question, Russell. What was the course that you did?
It was with a lady called Jo Major, and she runs a course specifically for people in the recruitment agency world, and it's very much around sort of looking at diversity and inclusiveness within recruitment agencies, but equally educating our clients in this world as well, and how one would actually approach and talk to a client about their how they can implement and increase their D&I workforce, basically through things like advising them on job descriptions, job ads, sort of elements that need to be done within their organizations, how they can reduce their unconscious bias potentially, and equally how they can increase their workforce in a time where as I'm sure everyone is aware, there is from our perspective there is a candidate shortage. People are not applying for jobs. People have moved out of the industry. People have reassessed their lives. People are, not moving because because of economic uncertainty. And equally, people are not moving because, in certain aspects, because they're not exposed to, some of the sort of, I'll use this word loosely, but toxic environments sometimes within their cultures, because they're not going to the office every day of the week. They're not being exposed to, elements of things that they don't enjoy. They're thinking, well, actually, I'm not experiencing this anymore, so I'm happy where I'm working. I'm still doing my job. I'm still being productive. I'm still being paid, but I don't have to go and talk to the person down the corridor who's not very nice to me, kind of thing. So, there's a number of reasons why there are these candidate shortages. And what D&I does, it actually increases the candidate pool from which you can actually attract candidates from. But you have to follow through a number of different ways of attracting these people. And, you know, as I said earlier, job ads, job descriptions, approaches, and, you know, showing you have policies, really.
I think, Lisa, probably the best thing to do is reach out to Russell White. You'll find him on LinkedIn, and Russell might be able to point you in the right direction. But we've come to the sort of, we're now 1 minute past 12, and you know, we've slightly overrun by a second. The thing that's really important as well to everybody on the session, the deck will be available. So I hope you haven't been sitting there taking copious notes. You didn't need to. The deck will be made available. I think that's okay. Heidi, Nicola. We'll get that out to you, so you can use that as a bit of a template forward. I think the observation I've made from this session is this is a really big subject, and as Russell said, you can't cover it in an hour, it's impossible. But I think you know, Reality HR's deck will be a start point, something you could use and adapt for your own applications. And I think it will probably be a subject we'll bring into another session later on, probably sometime in the new year. But I think the other thing that's important, everybody on the call, I know that Reality HR can help in this space. If you need help and support, they can give that to you. And I think probably again the most important thing is that I think we should all be helping and supporting ourselves through this area and this subject. So I don't think anything's right and anything's wrong. We've all got to do our best and move things forward. Would you like to close things off, Heidi or Nicola?
Oh, only to say there are a few questions about data in the chat that we haven't had time to answer. Please get in touch with us individually. You can find us through Pimento. We're members, and you'll find our Reality HR's contact details, or just Google us. You know, our website's available. In fact, I'll write the website in the chat right now. But we'd be really happy to talk to you. Those of you that we haven't had time to answer your questions right now, very, very happy to talk to you individually. And thank you all for listening, for your input. Really great to hear some of those questions and ideas and thoughts in the chat. So thank you all very much indeed for joining us today. And thanks for having us, David.
Pleasure. It's lovely to see you both, and have the rest of the day. Hope it's lovely for everybody. And yeah, there will be an email going out which will have the deck and contact details. So we'll be able to follow up accordingly. Thanks everybody for your time. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.